Hi everyone, the bike is a 2021 Kawasaki KX250F, and the problem is that it only starts with the fast idle knob pulled out, and as soon as you push the knob back in, it stalls. Now I've tried every turn of the idle knob from 0 turns out all the way up to almost 60, the maximum, and it made no difference. Here, check it out. Right now the idle knob is set to 30 turns out. The idle knob is out. I'm going to go ahead and try to fire it up. I'm going to prime the fuel pump. And we'll do that no matter where the idle knob is set, whether it's 0 turns, 20 turns, 40 turns, 55, I think the maximum is somewhere between 55 and 60. It doesn't make any difference. It starts right up every time when the fast idle knob is pulled out. As soon as you push it in, the bike just completely dies. All right, let me give you a little rundown on the recent history of the bike. Just about 12 riding hours ago, I went ahead and replaced the piston. This was before this problem even developed, by the way. I also had the head completely rebuilt, new springs, valves, retainers, keepers, seals. The valve seats were cleaned and polished, the whole head was cleaned. Went ahead and reassembled everything. The bike fired right up, ran great for the next 10, 12 hours or so. Had it out on 2 or 3 separate days. And then I was just kind of casually cruising along the trail and it just died on me. So I took it home, tinkered around a little bit with the fast idle knob. I discovered that I could get the bike started with the knob pulled out, but as soon as it was pushed in, it just died. And again, it didn't matter what setting. I tried every single turn, 0 turns out to like 60. I went through a couple batteries in the whole process. Nothing made a difference. So I tried a few other things. I went ahead and I replaced the coil and the spark plug wire and the plug cap and the spark plug itself. That didn't seem to make any difference. I went ahead and did a leak down test. It turned out really, really good, just a 4.5% loss of pressure. And I also checked the diagnostic light to see if that was kicking out any codes from the fuel injection system or any of the other sensors, but nothing there. So that's where we're at, and we're gonna have to dive into this bike and figure out what's going on. Okay, the plan is to start by removing the valve cover. I'll inspect the cam chain, camshaft, cam cap, and I'll visually inspect the valve springs and the cylinder head as best I can. And even though the spark plug is new and I've already changed it, I'm gonna go ahead and pull it and double check the plug gap. If we don't discover anything in here, then we'll turn our attention to the fuel injection system and see what we could discover there. All right, let's get started. All right, so before I remove the spark plug, I'm just gonna give a little blast of air down the spark plug hole. Make sure there's no garbage down there. Don't want anything falling down into the piston. Alright, so to remove the spark plug, you're going to need a extension about this long. And you could use either a 5/8 or a 16mm socket. Okay, so this is an NGK laser iridium spark plug, CR9EIB9, and according to the shop manual, the spark plug gap is supposed to be between 0.8 and 0.9 millimeters. So I've got the feeler gauge set to 0.85 right in the middle there. And that feels pretty good. There's just a little bit of resistance. So it looks like the spark plug gap is set fine. The spark plug itself looks fine. So, and we know that the bike's getting spark because it starts up. It wouldn't do that if there was no spark. And I've already gone ahead and replaced the coil, the plug wire, and the spark plug cap. So I'm going to assume we're all good to go. When you're removing the valve cover, make sure you don't lose these little washers. They're kind of disguised in the black color of the valve cover, and they'll fall down like underneath the skid plate and be kind of a pain to fish out, so just be wary of that. Really curious to see what we're going to discover under here. I'm usually pretty careful. I'm actually always pretty careful when I'm putting things back together. I typically triple check things when it comes to things like valve clearance and the timing, because making a mistake with that could be pretty catastrophic. So I just don't know. It's strange that the bike starts up with fast idle and then dies as soon as the fast idle is pushed in. It seems like it would be more like a timing issue or a valve issue that would cause that than some of the other things I've already looked into. But we'll see. Let's go ahead and get this thing turned over to top dead center and just take a closer look. Get these plugs removed. That was really on there. Oh, look at that. Yeah. Don't lose those little O-rings. That's what keeps the oil in there. All right, so on the KX250, there are dots on the cam gear here, and when the engine's at top dead center, there should be a dot lined up right here with the edge of the case on this side of the cam gear, and then one over here, same thing, lined up right with the edge of the case. So we'll go ahead and rotate the crank until we can see those dots. One of the dots is right here, so look at how loose that chain is. That's really loose. Huh. Okay. Alright, so right there, I've got the dot lined up on that cam gear right with the edge of the case. Same thing over here. So we should be at top dead center. I'm going to drop a screwdriver down the spark plug hole and just kind of go back and forth a little bit with the crank and just see if that is actually top dead center. Oh, I think that one will work. Now let's just watch that screwdriver. It's going down, going up, down. So right there is when the piston is at its topmost position. That's top dead center. And yeah, it looks like our dots are in the right spot. Our cam dots here. I don't know if you could see that on camera. Probably not, it's a little bit dark. But they're lined up right with the edge of the case, as they should be. That's right, the cam chain is a little bit tighter now. Huh. I bet this chain is pretty old. Okay, so I guess next we'll go ahead and get the feeler gauge out, and we'll just test the valve shims, see what the clearance is like. Actually, let's take a close look at this chain and make sure we've got the right number of links between the dots. There should be 28 links between the dots, or 30 if you count the link that's just past the cam dot on each side. So let's see, we got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28. So that's all good. Plus one extra just below the dot on this side for 29, and one over here for 30. All right, so that's correct. It's supposed to be 28 links between the dot, 30 if you include the links just outside of the dot. I wonder if we have a chain tensioner problem. But would that cause this problem, the idling problem? I mean, that could cause it to skip a tooth, but it hasn't. It's right where it's supposed to be. I don't really think that would cause the idling problem. Okay, so let's go ahead and measure the valve shim gaps and see if we discover anything weird there. Alright, so the intake cam is supposed to be 1/10 of a millimeter of clearance. I think the range is actually 0.08 to 0.12 millimeters, so I've got the 0.10, 1/10. Okay, that fits under there just with a little bit of resistance, so that one is good. That didn't go. Okay, yeah, no, that's good. So intake is good. Now the exhaust side, so I just noticed something. Isn't this cam supposed to be like turned up more? Well, I'll get the camera down there on that in just a second. I'm gonna go ahead and measure this side, and then we're gonna take a closer look at this cam, because I don't think it's supposed to be like that. Like in that, it's supposed to be up more, like 40 degrees or 45 degrees when the engine's at top dead center. I don't really know exactly like how much, but like that lobe is like really turned down low. What the heck? All right, hold on. Let me. All right. The exhaust side, the gap should be about 0.15 millimeters. That's right in the sweet spot of the range. So I'm gonna. Oh, that's like perfect. Okay. Yeah, I just feel a little bit of friction, but the feeler gauge slips right in there. No, I don't want to say no problem. There's like a little bit of resistance. Right, I'm gonna get in the right spot. Yeah, so valve shims seem to be fine. Okay, I'm gonna bring the camera down. I'm gonna have you take a look at this cam, and we're gonna figure something out here. Something's not right. All right, so this is what I'm talking about here. Let me pull this gasket up and out of the way. All right, look at this intake cam lobe. It's like pointing at like 9 o'clock, right? The exhaust lobe is pointing at, I don't know, it's like 45 degrees. What is that, like 130 or something? And I mean, when I worked on these bikes before, I vaguely remember this lobe not sitting this low, like it's supposed to be up. Okay, so I need to find a picture online or something to figure out if that is correct, because if that lobe is out of place, then that means the camshaft has slipped its gear. The gear has slipped on the camshaft, and it's throwing the lobes out of place. So the timing is out of place. And if that happened, I guess I'm lucky that my valves haven't impacted the piston and caused a whole lot of expensive damage. But, God, I can't believe the camshaft would have slipped like that. The gear. Let's take a look at the other side. Make sure that we're still at top dead center. Hold on. Okay, yeah, we are still right at top dead center. Cam gear dot lined up with the edge of the case here on the exhaust side. Same with the intake side. So, yeah, so what might have happened here is the intake cam gear may have turned on its shaft. Now these gears are just press fit onto the shaft from the factory. I don't actually know if there's like a spline or something that's supposed to kind of lock it in place, kind of key lock it in place. I have heard some stories of cam gears slipping, but geez, I mean, really? A slipped cam gear? All right, so I'm gonna have to come back in just a little while here. I need to try to find a picture, or you know what, I could take a look at my other bike, my 23, but only if it has the same cam. Okay, give me a minute. I'm going to go online. I'm going to see if my other bike uses the same cam with the same part number, because if it does, then I could pop the top off, the valve cover off my other bike, and take a look at the orientation of the cam lobes on that bike and compare them to this one and see if things are out of whack. All right, I'll be back. Okay, so it's actually a couple days later now. I did take a look at my other bike, and it does look like the intake lobe on this one, on my older bike here, the one that's not running, is a little bit lower. Not by much though. So over the course of the days, I went ahead and ordered new cams and a new timing chain, and you know, we'll take some pictures of the old cam and its orientation, and then we'll compare it to the new cams, I should say. I'm going to put both intake and exhaust cams in along with the new chain, and the before and after pictures will help us really see how much that gear has turned, because I'm pretty sure it has, because there is a definite difference between this one and my other bike, and we'll go from there. Okay, let's start taking this apart. All right, so we're going to start removing the cams and the cam chain, and the cam cap. And before we could do all that, we need to remove the cam chain tensioner. So we're going to start by removing the large bolt in the middle first. In here you're going to find a pin wrapped with a spring, and that's what forces the leg of the tensioner against the chain, creating the tension. So when you pull this out, you want to make sure that you don't lose that spring or that pin. All right, here it is here. There's the pin. That will go back in the spring. It sits in the pocket of the bolt, and then that will go back in later. All right, but next we need to remove the smaller bolts on the side here. Okay, so now even with those bolts removed, this thing is still kind of stuck on here because there is a rubber seal that kind of clamps it in place. And I find that if you kind of tilt it down a little bit so you can get at this edge and just kind of wiggle it, that eventually it'll pop off. There we go. All right, now there's an O-ring here. We want to make sure that is in good condition. Service manual recommends that you replace that. Honestly, I've reused them many times without an issue. But if you do ever see oil beginning to leak out of here, you know it's time to change that O-ring. Also, press this little button here and reset the tensioner all the way in. Because when you reinstall it, when you push that pin and that spring and that center bolt in, the spring is going to push this out like this, and it's gonna automatically adjust against the chain. So, but you do need to start with it all the way set in like this before you put it back in. All right. Okay, so we got the tensioner out. The next thing we need to do is we need to remove the cam cap. There's 8 bolts up there. So here we go. Alright, a couple things to be aware of when you're removing the cam cap. There's a little rubber O-ring here, don't lose that. And there's 2 half-moon retainer clips that often kind of stay stuck on top of the cam bearings. Alright, I got the one on the exhaust valve, or sorry, the exhaust bearing. So yeah, I'm going to lose that O-ring. Let me put that around my thumb here, just like that. And we'll remove the other retainer. Okay, that's really kind of stuck on the bearing. Alright, so we'll just let that be. I'm going to set these pieces aside and pop the cams out. I'm going to go ahead and zip tie the chain for now, just so it doesn't fall down the case. There we go, just like that. And just have to lift the cams up and back. They come out pretty easy. I still got that retainer clip on the bearing of this one, so I'm going to be careful that I don't drop that down into the case. It wouldn't be a big deal to get it out later since we're going to replace the chain. Alright. Okay, let's take a closer look at these camshafts now that they're off the bike. Here we've got the brand new camshaft. Over to the right, we've got the bad camshaft that appears to have slipped a tooth or maybe more. Now, check this out. We've got the hole here on the cam gear, and directly above that we have a tooth, And if we go over 1, 2 teeth here to the second gap there, and align our tool with the hole on the lobe, that's where we're parallel with the shaft. So again, we went up a tooth and then over 2 of the grooves in the gear, and that's where we're lined up with the hole in the lobe. On the cam that's bad, we actually have to go 1, 2, 3 grooves over, and only then, and I realize this might be difficult to see on the camera, but only then are we parallel with the shaft. And actually, it almost looks like we would need to go over a little bit more, almost to that next tooth. So the bad cam appears to be off by about a tooth and a half. That cam gear has slipped. Okay, so in just a minute we're going to remove the stator cover, but before we do that, let's go ahead and get the oil drained so we don't make a big mess when we remove the cover. There we go. I think I'm gonna have to remove that shift lever. Yeah. Okay. Stator cover should come off. Magnetism, okay. All right. Looks pretty clean in there. Let's see where to stuff this guy. Just kind of put him on top there like that. All right, so here's the flywheel, and the chain is behind the flywheel, so we need to get this off. We're going to use the Tusk 28x1 flywheel puller. There is a little half-moon shaped metal key, the Woodruff key, that locks the flywheel in place against the shaft. So don't lose it. Before the chain will come out, you have to remove this guide right down here. Let's see if this will go. There we go. Could make some nice jewelry out of this. Let's compare this to the new chain and see if it's stretched out. The chains look to be virtually the same length. The old chain is on the bottom, the new chain is on the top. If there is a difference, it's too hard to see. But we're gonna go ahead and put the new chain in anyways. Okay, in just a moment, we're going to install the new chain and cams, but before we do so, we need to take a look at the valve shims. This is a good time to pull those shims out and take some measurements so that you know what you have to work with when you're making adjustments in the future. Flip up the finger follower, magnet tool, and get that shim. And with everything apart, now would be a good time to just kind of make sure the finger followers are moving freely. And just do a visual inspection. Make sure there's no dirt or gook or foreign items floating around. Check for hairline cracks. Everything looks good here. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and measure the thickness of our shims. Now there's two ways we could do this. We could use the magnifier and read the print that's on the shim if it's still there, or if you have a micrometer, you could use a micrometer. So we're gonna go ahead and use the micrometer. So first of all, we turn it on, we zero it out, we open it up just a bit. The readout is in millimeters. And then we take our first shim. .98. All right, so this is probably a 3mm shim. Great, now we have a record of the thickness of these shims. We're gonna go ahead and put these shims back in and hope that they provide the correct clearance. Of course, if they don't, we'll have to make some adjustments and put some different shims in, but let's see. Okay, just for some clarification, later on when you're using the feeler gauges to measure the valve clearance, you're actually measuring the space between the finger follower and the cam lobe at top dead center. So just as an example, let me go ahead and drop this old camshaft in here. Just like this. And of course you'd be measuring the valve clearance after the cam cap is on, the chain is on, and everything is all torqued down to specifications. But this is just to make a point. All right, so when the engine's at top dead center, that cam is going to be about like that, and you're going to slip your feeler gauge in here. Trying to do this so that you could see on camera. It's going to slip right in there between the cam lobe and the finger follower. And then on this side as well. Just like that. Okay, we have our valve shims in place up here. We've recorded all their measurements. We've inspected the cylinder head for cracks and debris. We are just about ready to install our new chain and our 2 new cams. Before we do that, it's time to lube up. All right, so let's go ahead and make sure that these guides are lifted and up out of the way, and we'll go ahead and drop the chain right down the case. All right, once the chain is seated properly around the crankshaft gear, then it's probably a good idea to just temporarily zip tie it up. So that it doesn't fall back down and become a spaghetti factory inside the case. All right. Now before we install the camshafts, we're going to go ahead and get the flywheel back on. That way we can work with the crankshaft a little bit, make sure we're still on top dead center before we start fitting the gears onto the chain, or the cam gears onto the chain. Install the chain guide. Alright, let's go ahead and get this flywheel back in place. Let's double check to make sure that our chain is still wrapped tightly around the crankshaft gear. It is. And let's find the woodruff key. And let's drop it into the groove. Just like so. And that, of course, is going to fit right into the groove here on the inside of the flywheel. And if you carefully place the flywheel on the shaft and then rotate it, you'll feel when it falls into place, right into that, the groove falls right around the woodruff key, just like that. All right, if you're using an impact hammer to tighten the flywheel nut, just make sure that your chain isn't going to bind up. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and pull this down and stuff a rag under here to pull it up. Just like so. And then I'm going to get a rag and grip this as best I can. And just like that. Should be good to go. Okay, before we install the cams, let's try to make sure that we are at top dead center. Remember that line and that protrusion over here on the side of the case. Just like that. That looks good. Okay, let's get these cams on. All right, we're going to start with the exhaust cam first. We're going to find the dot. That dot there is supposed to be aligned with the top edge of the case, just below where the gasket would be. And when you're installing the exhaust cam, you want to pull up and make sure that all the slack is out of the chain. And yeah, perfect. Okay. So exhaust cam is in place. Now likewise, we have to find the dot on the gear. It's right there. We need to turn that so that it lines up with the edge of the case. And of course, we need to do this all without messing up the exhaust cam. Not sure if I got that. I gotta come around. We're just one tooth too far this way, so we're gonna lift it up and we're gonna try to skip it one tooth backwards. Just like that. Let's see how we look now. Yeah, now the dots actually look better now. Okay, time to count. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 29, and 30. The last two are the pins that are just below the mark on the cam. So that's correct. There's supposed to be 28 pins between the marks, 30 if you count the 2 pins just beyond the mark on each side. We're looking real good. Okay. All right, next we're going to go ahead and get this cover back on. And you'll notice that there's a dowel pin here. One of the bolts looks like this. That's the bolt that's going to go where the dowel pin is. Now we're going to go ahead and reuse this gasket, and I hope I don't regret that later, but you know, if we start to see leaks, it's not that difficult to change it out. So now let's make sure our gasket is seated as best as we could get it. look at that. Got a little piece of tree in the bike. All right, hopefully now it fits. There we go. Finally. Okay, now we're gonna go ahead and put our cam cap on, but before we do that, there's a couple of things we need to make sure of. First of all, make sure that the 2 dowel pins are fitted into the head. There's one here, and there's one right here. Also, make sure that you get your O-ring back in place right down here on the spark plug hole. Make sure the 2 retainers are placed back on the cams. And by the way, notice they are 2 different sizes. The larger one is for the exhaust cam, the smaller one is for the intake. Oh, almost dropped it in the case. Okay. And of course, you need to make sure that you have all 8 of your bolts, and we'll talk about where these silver ones go in just a second. All right, if you take a look at the bottom of the cam cap case, you'll notice that these ends here that go over those retainer clips, they have a groove in it. So it's going to be a tight fit. Sometimes it takes a little bit of finagling to get it into place, get everything snapped and seated down correctly. But let's see if we get lucky. Gotta make sure that O-ring on the spark plug hole doesn't pop out of place. Hey, all right, that's the sound I like to hear, that little snap, that little pop sound. You know it's seated down fully flush with the cylinder head. Great, okay. One silver bolt goes top left. The other silver bolt, bottom right. And then all the other black bolts go in the 6 other spots. So we're just gonna get these started with our fingers. Then we're going to use the electric drill to get them close, but we're never gonna use our power tools to drive these small bolts into anything aluminum. There's too much of a risk of driving it in too far and stripping out that aluminum. We're always going to torque things down by hand to the proper torque specifications. And all of these bolts, all 8 of them, require 89 inch-pounds of torque. 89 inch-pounds. All right, so like I said, we're just gonna drive them down close. We're not gonna drive them all the way. Well, I said that and it's exactly what I didn't want to do. I'm gonna go the rest of the way by hand. And there is a sequence. It's best to start in the center and kind of move around in a star pattern, crisscross pattern. Just gonna get them finger tight right now. We'll get the torque wrench out and snug these up in a moment. All right, 89 inch-pounds. And I really hope those valve shims are correct. Because it's kind of a pain to pull this all apart to replace the shims. Okay, next we're going to put the tensioner back in. Now, a couple things. Make sure that the rubber O-ring is in place. Also, when you install this, the foot, see how this kind of looks like a foot? The toes are going to be installed facing inward, like that. All right, but let's press this. Let's get this seated all the way back down, and then it's going to go in just like this. And you feel it kind of snap in once that O-ring is seated. Then we're going to put in the two outside bolts, the smaller bolts. All right, next you're going to install the spring and the pin. Pin goes in the spring. The whole thing goes in the center bolt here. You're going to hear it ratchet as the tension is applied to the cam chain. Hear that? Click, click, click. All right, at this point, everything is secured and tightened down, so we're gonna make a couple revolutions on the crankshaft and just make sure everything is moving as it should. Nothing's binding up. We're just gonna go slow on this first revolution. You're gonna feel some resistance when those valve springs are getting compressed. That ratcheting sound, that's the cam chain tensioner tightening up. That's exactly what we want. Cam chain feels pretty good. All right, let's bring it back around to top dead center. There. Dots are lined up with the case. Mark is lined up with the case. We are spot on. Let's double check our pin count. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 29, 30. Perfect. Okay, let's measure our valve clearance. All right, time to measure the valve clearance. The exhaust clearance should be 0.14 to 0.18 millimeters. The intake should be 0.08 to 0.12. So we're gonna go ahead and measure the intake first. We've got our feeler gauges set to 0.10, the midpoint right here within the midpoint of the spec. So Slide it under here. All right, that feels pretty good. That feels about perfect. I think that's spot on. There's just a little bit of resistance, just a little bit of grab of the feeler. So the intake side is good to go. Let's try a 0.15. That's right about in the middle of the spec for the exhaust side. Oh yeah, perfect. One more to go. Also perfect. Okay, we'll write those down, record them, and remember them for later. That's great. It's not too often I put the top end back together and don't have to readjust the valve shims. So that saves a lot of time. I'm glad that worked out. Good. Okay. All right, next we'll get the valve cover in place. Make sure the valve cover gasket isn't pinched or folded under. All right, drain plug is in. We need about 3/4 of a liter, 750 milliliters. And we are using Valvoline 4-stroke wet clutch, 10W40 oil. All right, and there was about 3/4 of a liter of oil left in this container, so we should be pretty good here. All right, moment of truth, everyone. It's time to see if this thing fires up. I'm gonna go ahead and try to fire it up without pulling the fast idle knob. Prior to this problem, the bike always would fire up without the fast idle knob. I do have it turned 30 turns out, just like my other bike. Let's see, fingers crossed. Here we go. Gonna go ahead and get the fuel pump primed. And then we'll let her rip. That sounded really good. It fired right up. I actually wasn't expecting that. But I think we're good to go. I think that slipped cam gear was definitely the problem. I'm excited to take out for a little test spin. Let's do that next and wrap this up. I'm very happy that I was able to get this bike up and running. It's kind of crazy that the problem was a slipped cam gear. I mean, usually when you encounter problems on a dirt bike, it's because you broke something during a crash, or a part wore out, or something wasn't maintained properly. In this case, just a manufacturer defect. I mean, in my opinion, I don't think a gear on a camshaft should really ever slip. But I guess I was lucky that it only slipped one tooth. It could have been a lot worse. Had it slipped more, the valves could have impacted the piston, blowing up the entire top end. Well, I hope you found this video informative. Please remember to subscribe. Take care, everyone.